Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar here on Shure Designer Software. My name is Tom, and I'm going to be the host of this session right now.
I'm Chris Morley. I am the Market Development Manager for Shure UK, and we are joined by another colleague in Scotland.
Hi everyone, I'm Craig and I'm joining this webinar from my home office studio up in Scotland where the air is fresh and yeah, it's a nice day outside, but unfortunately we're inside. But yeah, we've got a lot of good content and I'm really looking forward to this session today.
Excellent, thanks guys. Well, just before we start, I'm sure the session will give you lots of questions throughout the session, so please feel free to pop them in the Q&A panel. Hopefully most will be answered throughout the session, but for those that we don't answer, we'll skip to those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Chris Morley.
Thanks, Tom. So let's have a look at today's agenda. So we have Designer Basics, how, having a look at Shure Designer and what it does. And we have Designer Workflows, how Designer can be used in a number of different scenarios in a number of different ways. And of course, as Tom said, there'll be time for questions at the end.
You can't have a webinar without question answers, can you?
Okay, so what does Shure Designer software do? It allows you to plan, create and deploy systems, as simple as that. Here are the supported products from our ecosystem range. You have the MXA 910 ceiling array, you have the MXA 710 linear array, you have the MXA 310 table array, you have the MXA mute button. For our DSP options, you have the IntelliMix Room software DSP, you have the IntelliMix Room P300 and the ANI USB matrix. And to complete the audio chain, we have the PoE network loudspeaker, the MXN 5C. So with the key features for Designer, it's step and repeat. You've got logical project creation and you can reuse the templates. Pass it on, so you can easily distribute these files. Your designer in the office can send this to your commissioner on site. Seamless routing. Dante routes are now all done in Designer. There's no need to go into Dante controller to do these routes, to do this route. Optimizing. With one click of a button, you can have a working system in seconds. This is for 95% of all rooms. Staying up to date through Designer, the products that we previously mentioned, these can now be updated in Designer. And LED mute status. This is a new feature that allows the end user to see whether they're on a call or not. So if you're not on a call, there'll be no LED lights showing. If you are on a call, the LED lights will be mute synced to your colors. Okay, so let's have a look at today's Designer workflows. Obviously, Designer can do a lot of things, but we're going to just cover 5 today. Accessing the network, project planning, pre-designed files, live setup and templates. I'm now going to hand over to Craig, who's going to tell us a bit more.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, Designer can be used in a lot of different ways. And what we're going to do in these next few sections is just take you through some of those different processes, different workflows about how Designer can be used. We're working on the basis that it can be used by many different people in many different ways. And I have to be honest, I have pre-recorded these because I don't trust my home broadband. So they have been recorded as live, so you can play a little bit of spot the difference between different things in the room. But yeah, first off, let's look at how Designer is used as a real-time live tool. In this section, we're going to look at Shure Designer software being used as a live configuration and control tool. This is the scenario we would have if we were going to site or we were needing to just connect with the device quickly and change some settings and not have to create a project or a location to get the device working. Or it might be a pre-existing site that you just need to go in and make some minor adjustments with. Previously, a lot of our products had web browser based control systems built in. That facility was great and very quick, but it got quite clunky when you had multiple Shure devices in a single room and you needed a web browser page for each each device, and it just, yeah, it got quite hard to control and orientate yourself with where each device was in the room and what it was connected to. So Designer allows us to bring everything into the one piece of software, so that you're not looking at multiple browser windows and flipping between windows in a single room scenario. So without further ado, let's dig into Shure Designer to see how we use it in a quick fire live mode. So I'm just going to open up Designer here, and when Designer boots up, there are no online devices, but you'll see down here in the corner that it will eventually scan the network, and it will look at the and report the number of live devices that you have. So to get to our online devices, we can either click this little indication down in the bottom left hand corner, or we can go to the online devices tab in the left hand side here. Because we're doing things the correct way, I'll go to the left hand side and I'll just left click here, and this brings in what devices are live on the network that I'm connected to. This is my home office, which some would say is maybe over specified with with microphones, but yeah, I think the term is because I can. But yeah, let's have a look at this window in a bit more detail. So on the left hand side, we have a list of all the device names. These can be renamed within the settings, so these can mean something. Currently I'm using the ANI USB with a Microflex wireless transmitter to do these sessions. Microflex wireless is currently not supported in Designer, but the rest of these devices, primarily the Microflex Advanced family, are supported in Designer, along with P300 and things like our mute button, network speaker as well. They're all supported in Designer. Next along, we have the IP address of each device. We then have the type of device that it is, just in case you've changed this name to be something that isn't any USB or that tells you what it is. We then have an indication of which firmware version the device is running on. So I've updated most of my peripherals here, but I've left 1.3.10, a table array microphone, on a lower version of firmware, just so that you can see what it looks like. This is a very similar report to what you would see in the Shure Update utility piece of software, where you can upload new versions of firmware. With Designer, you can do that direct within here. You don't need to come out of it to go into Update Utility to do the firmware update. So to prove the point, I'm just going to select this device here and then simply send the update. It will give me a little bit of a warning about what's going to happen, and I can then cancel or start the update. So I'm going to do that. So while I'm talking, that will just work and do its thing. Yeah. We have other bits of information here where we can see release notes about the various versions of firmware, and if a device is currently being used in a project, we can see where that device is currently linked to. So one of the setups that I have in this office is using IntelliMix Room with an MXA 910. So you can see here that they're currently linked to my office location. So yeah, essentially this is your dashboard for live devices that are on the network. You can, if you have more than one type of device, you can hover over the little icons and you will see that the little ID button appears. This is the same as if you were in the web browser and you wanted to identify which device was which. If you had more than one MXA 910 or more than one MXA 310, then yeah, you can simply click and it will flash the device, and then click again and it will stop flashing the device. So you can identify where devices are in the system. So yeah, as I mentioned before, this is live. So these are devices that are live on the network. So if we wanted to change some settings in a P300, for instance, we simply double click into the P300, and this brings up exactly the same window that you would have seen on the web browser before. So devices that had web browsers but now don't have web browsers are P300, ANI USB. I think there's MXA 310 still has its browser, MXA 910 still has its browser for now. However, the MXA 710, the MXN5 ceiling speaker, the mute button, they all need to be controlled through Designer, whether it's through projects or through live mode like we're talking about. So yeah, just to give you a bit of an idea, yeah, we can then double click into any of these aspects and we can change settings. These all open up in a very similar way than that would have happened through the browser. Just to prove that this is live mode, I will dice with the devil and open up the ANI USB that I'm using at the moment. So you can see that I'm coming in on Dante input 2 from the access point, and then I'm feeding out of the USB output to the system that you're hearing just now. So yeah, I could change the gain settings, or maybe if I forgot to put in maybe a high pass filter, then I could run that in now and then switch the filter on, and then maybe put a low cut filter on my microphone. You may or may not have heard the difference there, given that it's quite low down. But yeah, we can change all of this in real time. So that is essentially how Designer is used in a live environment. So again, to recap, you have exactly the same functionality that you would do from the browsers, but it's just from one single piece of software dashboard now, which is, it keeps everything in one place, it keeps everything tidy. You still have the abilities to change IP addressing if we wanted to, or change network configurations. Then we simply left click into the given device, and then in the settings tab, the cog up here, we can then open up the settings of this device, and it will give us the different kind of menus, the different network configurations that we need. And yeah, everything is the same as it was in the browsers, but just now being used from within Designer. So yeah, this is the end of this section. Hopefully this makes sense. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to shout out, and yeah, we'll do our best to clarify.
Great, thanks, Craig. So when the devices are all plugged into the network, you'll be able to see them on the online devices tab, as Craig just showed you there.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one of the main functions of Designer, is bringing in all of that web browser-based functionality that you had on the individual devices into a single dashboard that you can look at and grab devices quickly and configure them. It's particularly useful if you're using Shure devices that are part of a larger scale deployment, where you're maybe using third-party devices that are not in the Shure audio ecosystem. This gives you the same functionality that you always had with the browsers, but except you don't have lots of browser windows to deal with. So yeah, as I mentioned at the start, these are intended as a high-level overview, hopefully to prompt some questions. We can delve deeper into them later on in the session. But the next thing we're going to look at is how you can use Designer before you even get to site. So as a pre-design, as a sales tool, as a bid submission type tool, whereby you're looking at the type of solution you might be looking for a given client. So let's have a look at how we use the Designer environment as a pre-sale design tool. So away from using Shure Designer software in live mode and connecting to real networks and physical devices, we can use Shure Designer software in an offline or design mode that allows us to be quite flexible and quite powerful with room designs and projects that are in the pre-sales or design or specification phases. So let's have a look at that just now. So I'm just going to open up Designer once again. Slightly different this time, so I'm not connected to a network that has any Shure devices connected. So as you can see down here, I have confirmation I'm not online. I don't need to be, but yeah, for this scenario, I'm in the office, I'm doing a bit of a design, so I wouldn't have ordinarily any Shure devices connected to that network. So first thing I need to do is create a project so that everything's kept in one meaningful place. So I'm going to make a project for an important customer, because they all are. Hit create, and then within that project I need to create a location. That's the room that I'm going to be designing. So new location, and let's make a large meeting space for maybe 30 people. So Designer immediately takes us into this virtual design world. So at the moment we're in the routing tab, which is where we drag peripherals into the ecosystem solution, and then we can join the dots and create this signal flow and make the basics of the system to start with. So let's do that. In this example, let's take a 910 in the ceiling. Let's take an IntelliMix Room 8-channel license. Let's take a mute button, because we're going to put a mute button in the table because a 910 doesn't have a button. And then it's a big room, so relatively big room, so let's take 4 ceiling speakers. Just drag them in quickly. Now what we could do at this point with other kind of normal DSP behavior and programming behavior would be we would manually connect the dots and create a signal flow. Within Designer you have a function called optimize, which is up here, and what optimize does is a number of things actually. Let's just find out what it does. It gives you a bit of information when you hit the magic optimize button. So what Optimize is going to do is it will give you a prompt to say that it's about to make these changes. It creates the audio routes between the devices that are logical to the whole system. It turns on mute synchronization between the LED status on the MXA 910, the mute button itself, and also the muting control of the auto mixer within the DSP, in this case IntelliMix Room. So let's just hit the optimize. Before we do, actually, what it also does is it adjusts the audio settings that essentially refine the whole system relevant to the Shure microphones that are connected to the system. So you can click the blue question mark within Designer if you want, and it will open up a separate window that has a little table reference of what that process actually does. But yeah, it just further refines things, adjusts some gains, puts in some EQ or filtering, that kind of thing, to make the system as efficient as it possibly can be. So let's hit optimize. And then you do have the option when it's done to either go to the coverage page where you can look at the lobes and the speaker placement, or we can close this and go back into this routing page. I'm going to just go back into the routing page briefly, just partly because my OCD is twitching with these lines that aren't straight, but also because we've got 4 speakers in this solution. In my mind, it makes sense to name these, because that way when we come to look at them in the coverage page, they will mean something. Designer hasn't created a separate output for each speaker. You could do that if you wanted to, but from an efficiency standpoint, this is a nicer way to do it. You have things like speaker delay and limiting and EQ on board each speaker, so we don't need to have separate outputs from IntelliMix Room just to do things like speaker delays. So it is quite an efficient way of running Dante streams over the network as well. So I'm just going to name these quickly. Front left, front right, mid left, and guess what I'm going to call this one? Yes. So that's our basic signal flow, and if this was uploaded to a live system, this would pass audio at the point where it was synchronized. We'll come on to that in a different section, but for now, let's go and have a look at the coverage map. Coverage map wise, it's a little bit messy to start with because we don't have any real control here, but these concentric circles and lines and bubbles and things are all icons that show the layout and the coverage of each individual component part of the system here. Within the layers section on the left hand side, we can turn these off so that we can hide them to make it a little bit easier to manage initially. And also, if we want to take screen grabs of lobe layouts and things, we can turn off the speaker coverage so that it means something, and it's a bit easier to see and quantify if we're submitting it into a document. So at the moment, that's all fine. Let's just change the units from feet to meters. And what we can do in Designer, the workspace is kind of generic at the moment. It doesn't mean anything to the real world. What we can do is we can add an image into the Designer environment that could be a floor plan of a room. And what we can then do is we can then scale that floor plan so that it's relevant to the coverage pattern of the 910 or the peripherals in the room, speakers, microphones, etc. So if we know that dimension, maybe we know the front to back dimension, so let's just scale that. So draw to scale, draw a line, and then we know that is 9.5 meters. Let's just scale that. And then what we can do is just adjust our workspace slightly to reflect that so that it's nice and tidy. So now we've got a room that is scaled more or less to the real world, which means we can now start putting in the devices and looking at lobe layouts. Now, what I'm going to do, this MXA 910 is intended for use as picking up the front presenters, but also the front section of the room, and as much of the room as we can, really. I'm thinking in my head that this might be better with a second MXA 910, just to cover the room, the rear of the room a bit more. But yeah, we'll cover that just shortly. So if I turn the coverage pattern of the 910 on, you can see that we get the default layout that happens with the 910, the way it's shipped. So I'm just going to drag these in so that they are slightly more real world. You can just click and drag these. You can also control how wide the lobes are, and you can change that in the right hand side. The same as you can control the array height, all that kind of stuff is all available in the menu on the right hand side. For this exercise, I'm just doing this quite roughly so that you can see how this builds up a picture, and you can create a relatively meaningful layout that gives you a good head start when you come to site, so that it's not a new design when you come to site, it's more of a fine-tuning exercise. So that's a pretty good lobe layout. I can already see that I'm going to need possibly another MXA 910, so I could either add that in the routing page where I drag another unit in, or what I can do in here is, rather than going back and forward, I can simply drag a 910 in and place it in the workspace, and that will appear here as well. So we maybe don't need all 8 lobes, so I'm just going to hit 8 delete and maybe 7 delete, just so that we've got maybe another 6 lobes. And then let's just switch off that front 910 for a moment so we can bring this into a more meaningful position. So I'm going to place this pretty much in the middle of the room with the intention that it's going to cover the back area of the room, the back participants, but it's also going to give me a little bit of coverage towards the front. If this was a multi-purpose room and people were facing a different way, then this would give me more lobes to cover the area in terms of where people are facing and where they're going to be. So let's just switch them both back on. So yeah, we have our 2 910s covering that area quite well. Let's switch them off briefly and then look at the loudspeakers. Let's just switch the 2 front ones on. So This is where it's handy if you've named them, because you can select them and it will tell you which one's where. The concentric circles on the loudspeakers give you the 3, 6 and 9 dB roll-off points at 1 kilohertz. So it's a nice way of judging as true as you can how the speaker is going to behave in terms of SPL in the room, and obviously relative to where it's placed. So what you can do is then create a fairly even coverage. Let's just switch these two on as well, and that way we've got a little bit more relevant information on the screen. So yeah, we can drop these speakers in where we would ideally want them to be. We can then fine tune that in the virtual world as well. So yeah, this coverage page gives you a very good head start when you get to site, because you can drop speakers in, you are able to measure where they are in the room, so that you know roughly where they need to be to get this end result. And the same with the microphones. One thing we need to do, because we've added in another MXA 910, the system is not now optimized, because if we go back to the routing page, we will see that we have a lonely 910 here that isn't doing anything. So we've got an 8-channel version of IntelliMix Room. So what we could do one of two things. We could hit optimize, and then what Designer will do is it will say, well, okay, I'm going to use it in this sense with an IntelliMix Room 8-channel license, but because I've only got 8 channels of echo cancellation in this license, I'm going to use the echo cancellation on board the 910s and just use the IntelliMix output. So this would be fully echo cancelled coming into IntelliMix Room. So IntelliMix Room just becomes an auto mixer of these two IntelliMixes. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it would be to change the IntelliMix Room license count from 8 channels to 16 channels. And that would then allow us, if we then optimize this once more, just zoom out a little bit, we can hit optimize, and what the system will now do is it will revert to the way it was, whereby all 16 lobes from the two 910s come into IntelliMix Room, and then they are processed by the echo cancellation on board IntelliMix Room software DSP. So yeah, that would be another way of doing it. So that's essentially a way of creating systems ahead of time from a design and a sales point of view, because you can then take screen grabs of this system. You can zoom in and out, you could ask it to fit into the window, those kind of things, and you can use the coverage map tab to switch layers on and off so that you can take screen grabs again that would show a potential end client what the lobe coverage is like in their room. So yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll do our best to clarify. But this is how we use Designer in offline or design mode. So we're not connected to any Shure devices, but it can be a very powerful pre-sales and design tool.
Thanks, Craig. That's great. So the pre-sales team can really look at how many mics they're going to need for the space, how many speakers they're going to need, and what DSP options they can use. Over to you, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the beauty of that part of Designer, is that you can use it ahead of time to help with your bid submission or system designs, and just working out what we need to put where and how many mics. If one mic will potentially cover a room, if we need to use another one, we can build that in the early stages, and then obviously following on from that, we've then done the project design, we've done the audio routing and the configuration almost, to the point where it could be deployed to a real system. So we now can use Designer when we go to site. So let's have a look how we use Designer when we take that design to the physical building site. In this next section, we're going to look at another way of using Shure Designer, and that instead of offline mode, we're going to look at how you use it in a live or online mode. The first way we're going to look at is when you have a pre-designed project. So what we talked about in the offline mode, where we design projects and we pull devices in and make the wiring and all the rest of it, this scenario now is that we've done that and we are now going to site with that project file, and we now need to make the virtual solution work with real equipment. So if I open up Designer once more, what we've done is I have created a pre-designed project for our Rose Shure Experience Centre. So at the moment, I'm on site. I've plugged into the network, so immediately Designer is telling me that there are online devices. So Designer, when it detects online devices on the network, it will behave in a different way than when it's offline. In that when you click into a location, it will automatically go to live mode. So I'll let you see that just now. So I've done this ahead of time. So if I go into my project, and then I've done this room design for a roundhouse room in the Shure Centre in London. So if I open up this location, what will happen, double left click, is that Designer will automatically go into live mode. So you can see here, we're in live mode. It's telling me what devices are live on my network that aren't already associated with projects, which is why there's 7 online, but only 5 appearing here. To prove to you that I've done this ahead of time, I'm going to go into offline mode by just clicking the live button, and you'll see that my design instantly comes up in the routing tab here. So what I've got in the roundhouse room design is an MXA 710 2-foot, grey for those of you that are curious. I've got a P300 processor, and I've got a single MXN5 ceiling speaker. So very, very simple design. I've optimized this within Designer ahead of time, and what I now need to do is go and make this into a live working system. So if I go into live mode, what you will see when if you are in live mode and you come out again, Designer will give you a warning saying that you need to sync virtual devices with online devices, and it gives you the option to continue to live mode or close. So what we could do is just come straight out of Designer once more and then go back into the roundhouse room like I was. So I'm on site, I've plugged in, and this is now me wanting to make this work. So I'm in live mode. I know that there are online devices. These are the devices I have available to me that are on the network and not allocated to another project. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of doing the routing and the coverage map, first I'm going to go into the sync tab. And what this does is this shows me that the devices that are in my design that I've done ahead of time. So you can see here the MXA 710, the MXN5 speaker, and the P300 processor. It gives me those virtual devices, and what I can now do is I can create a relationship between these available devices that are live and the virtual devices. Designer's also giving me a little warning up here saying this location is in live mode, 0 of 3 devices are associated. So yeah, this kind of confirms what we have here in front of us. So if I go in, so I'm looking for a 710 2-foot. So this is, again, I could ID this if I wanted to. If there was more than one, I can double check that that is the same, the unit that I require. So I left click and hold, drag this on top of the 710, bang, I get a green bar to say that is now related. Same with the speaker. Again, left click and hold, drag over, and that's fine. And then the P300, again, left click and hold, drag over, and that's fine. What I can then do is I can either optimize or I can synchronize. So what we need to do is we've done this design ahead of time, so we know that the settings that we've done ahead of time are what we want to do or what we want to start with. So what I'm going to do is synchronize the design that we've done offline with the live devices. So if we go into the synchronize tab, I'm going to push it to the devices. So I'm going to send this design configuration to the devices. And then that's all good. So we get a warning saying push to devices, this will completely overwrite the devices with the design and momentarily cause the audio to drop out. Note, only this design will be pushed to your devices. So, and again, it gives you the option further to just making the configuration. It will actually make the Dante connections as well. So you don't need to do anything in Dante controller when you do this. So we click push and we will then get a little progress bar as to how we're doing. Hopefully, because all these devices are factory reset and just needing a design, we will see, yeah, 3 successful. So we can then click done, and that is all good. This one's come up not synced, so there's maybe been a change in config with it being a new unit. So let me just push this to designs once more. And if you think of the sync tab as your save as or your save station, this is where you create a working record of what you have running in real time versus what you can take away on your machine to then come back to. So at the moment you can see all the devices are now synced. So what we did ahead of time within Designer is now what's running on these devices. So that's all fine. If we wanted to then run this into a working system and make changes, that's all fine again. We can go to the routing, or we could just double click on the device. We could go to the routing tab. In the routing tab, you'll notice now we have green ticks where the connections are. These relate to properly subscribed Dante routes. So if you think of the green tick as the same as the green tick in Dante controller, where it gives you confirmation that that path has been subscribed properly. This is what these ticks refer to. So we've got green bars that show us we're in live mode. If we were to go into something and maybe into the speaker and change, maybe we wanted to add in a little bit of parametric EQ, we switch that in. I'm not going to play around with this just because this is just purely for the sake of making a change. We can close that. And then we can then go back to our sync tab, and you will see now that the speaker is now not synced. So it's still running the changes that we've just made, but the designer instance is not the same as what's running in real time. So what we need to do now is we can still save the changes, but instead of pushing it to the devices, we need to pull into Designer. So to make these changes permanent in Designer, so that we've got a record of what's happening, we can then synchronize and pull to design. So all we're doing is confirming those changes and bringing them back into the Designer environment so that the project file on our machine is accurate. So it's not affected anything that's running. All it's done is it's essentially saved the changes to our project file. And we can click done. So now we've got synced. So just to prove that once more, if we wanted to change something within the P300, again, we can double click from here into, sorry, no we can't. Yes we can, sorry, my computer's running a little bit slow. We can double click into the P300. We could make changes to maybe the noise reduction algorithm. We could switch it to medium for each of the channels. Let's just do it for 2 in the interest of time. And then again, because we've made a change, it's now not synchronized with Designer. So before we disconnect our machine, we need to save the changes to the project file. So again, we synchronize, pull to design, pull. And what again that will do is save the changes back into the project file so that we have a record of what we've just done, what we've commissioned, and how the system was left. And yeah, that is essentially how you take an offline design that you've done to site, connect to the network. You then make the relationship with the virtual devices in the sync tab, drag and drop to the correct devices, the real devices, and then you synchronize, push to devices, and then that is then your system up and running. So there's very little in terms of on-site commissioning time to do in terms of making the network connections and making the audio routes. It's more of a fine-tuning exercise when you get to site. So yeah, as always, if there's any questions, you know what to do. Ask a question, ask away, and we'll do our best to clarify.
Great, so this really can cut down the amount of time that is spent by the engineer on site.
Exactly, they literally hit the ground running with the design. You've done the legwork ahead of time, you've created the project, you created the locations, you've deployed it to the real devices. So yeah, essentially the programmers and the commissioning engineers are just using the time on site as a fine-tuning and minor adjustment exercise, which yeah, it really kind of points to that whole efficiency of use of the time on site. So obviously, that's in the ideal world. You would have that project file built ahead of time and you would know what you're doing when you go to site. But there will always be occasions where you need to make files, you need to make locations on the fly, and you need to create room solutions as you go when you are live on site, connected to the network and needing to make things work for a number of reasons. So what we can do now is we can look at how you use Designer on site in live mode to create real working solutions to deal with real-time surprises when you're on site. In this section, we're continuing on from where we were on site before, where we were deploying a pre-designed live room that we had made ahead of time and we were taking it to site. And now what we're using Designer for is to create a room on the fly. We're on site, we've realized that a room for whatever reason has been missed off the list, but all the equipment's here, we just haven't been told about it. So what we need to do is, rather than making a design offline and then bringing it to site and deploying it, we need to make the design as we go in live mode. So yeah, what we're going to do is have a look at how we do that. So if we look here in Designer, we have our online devices. So you can see from what we've been developing so far, we've got the 910 and IntelliMix room related to my office setup. We've now got the 710 2-foot, the MXN5 ceiling speaker and the P300 related to the roundhouse room, but we now have another room that involves an MXA310 and an ANI USB, and we need to just make that work quickly. So what we need to do is let's go back into the projects so that we keep everything in line. Go into the Rose Experience Center, roundhouse room. We need to make another room because that's what we're going to do. So let's make a new location. Let's just call it a huddle space. 4-person, and then create. So because we're connected to a network that has live devices on it, Designer has automatically taken us to live mode, and it's giving us the available devices that aren't subscribed, that aren't related to a current project on that network. So yeah, conveniently, because we haven't planned it at all, but conveniently, we want to create a system that has an MXA310 and an ANI USB in this room. So what I can do is simply drag the live devices into my working environment. And what I can do, let me just swap these around so that they are logical. And then what we can do is simply, bear in mind these are live, so these are technically passing audio at the moment. We can optimize these to work together. So all we have to do, drag the two devices in and hit the optimize button. Again, we get the warning like we did before about what optimize actually does. So we're going to hit optimize and then bang, we should end up with an automatic configuration. Now on this occasion, because there's no built-in echo cancellation or per channel processing in an ANI USB, the designer has chosen to use the mix output, which will be an intelligent mix of up to 4 of the lobes that the MXA310 is creating. So this is our optimized device design. This is running, technically passing audio right now. What we can do is, if we wanted to create some or adjust the lobe pickup patterns, then again we can double click into the MXA 310. If we wanted to make this slightly more, if we wanted to make these supercardioid, for instance, then we could make these slightly narrower. We could make them so that they were slightly overlapping, and yeah, we could even make one that was kind of, well, depending on the table shape, I guess we could change this to a hypercardioid. I don't know why the table would be that shape, but hey, in the interest of just having a play, let's go with that. So we could, yeah, we can adjust the lobe positions as well within here, the same as we would have done in the web browser. And yeah, essentially that is us passing audio. So if we had a USB cable in that room, we could plug it into the ANI USB, and essentially we could begin using that as a room system. Obviously, if there was an external speaker, then we would hook that up to the analog in on the ANI USB, or we might just use the PC speakers, or however that's going to work. But yeah, again, if we close that out, if we go to the Synchronize tab, remember, synchronize is what saves your changes, and we've just created a new location within the Rose project file. So we want to have a record of what we've done, albeit it's been on the fly, but at least we'll have a way of saving it. So what we can do is then synchronize and pull to design, because remember, we're wanting to save the changes from the devices into Designer. So if we pull to design, pull, then we are synchronized. So Designer and the working environment are both synchronized. So yeah, this is again just a very, very quick section just to let you see that Designer can be used on the fly to create additional rooms, or to create very quick systems without a lot of programming time involved. And yeah, that's another string to the designer's bow. As always, any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat section, and we'll do our best to clarify.
Great. So when it comes to putting the live file on a site, it's just a case of the engineer EQing and making the smallest changes to give it the best audio experience in that room.
Absolutely. He's not having to start from the very beginning with every room. The rooms are done ahead of time, and as I say, it's very easy to drop them in real time and then use Optimize to just get your room up and running and then make minor adjustments. Following on the efficiency path, if you like, one of the last section that we're going to look at looks at how you can use Designer where you have large deployment scenarios where you have multiple rooms of the same type, maybe identical spaces that use exactly the same component parts, and rather than designing them from scratch, we can use the template function within Designer. So let's have a look at how Designer deals with rooms of the same type. So let's have a quick look at how templates work in Shure Designer. Templates are a concept that are separate to projects and locations. They sit on the outside of the whole process, and as a result they can be used to create similar rooms where there are lots of them. If you need to create multiple instances of the same type or the same rooms with the same component parts, you can use templates as opposed to building them from scratch, which is nice. So there's two ways to use templates, two ways to build templates within Designer. Let's have a look at that now. So one way is to use an existing room that you've just made. So if we use maybe the room that we just did in the last exercise where we were had to design this very quick huddle space. If we wanted to use that layout and that component design, if there was lots of rooms the same as that, then instead of making them from scratch again, we could just use templates to create those rooms again and again in future projects. So the way we do that is we go into the location that we want to use, which is the huddle space one in this instance, double left click, and then instead of doing anything with the design file, we simply click Create Template. and then we can give it a name. So I'm just going to call this huddle space 1. And then maybe make a note saying it's an MXA 310 and an ANI USB. And then hit create. So what that has done is that has saved that template in the templates section. It's also taken us into the template itself. So if we wanted to, straight away we could create a location from that template. So we could create rooms going forward. That's pretty obvious about how that would happen. But yeah, essentially you just click create location, give it a name, a description if needed, and then you just select which project within your list it's part of. I'm not going to do that just now because this section is about templates rather than creating projects and all the rest of it. So that's one way of creating a template. The other way of creating a template is to go all the way back to the beginning to the projects section, where we have your main screen, and you'll see under my projects you have my templates. So if we left click into here, you'll see we have HS1, the one that we just built from an existing room. We also have the option here to create a new template from within this section. So we're not in a project at all at the moment, we're just in the template section. So let's do that. So let's call this creatively HS2, and then maybe give it a description. This is going to be a slightly higher spec room, so maybe an MXA 710 and a USB and a speaker and a mute button. Create. So I need to play memory games now and remember what I just wrote there. So this is where we're in the template at the moment that we've just created, so we need to give it some component parts to make the solution with. So from memory, it was an MXA 710 2-foot. We're going to put it on the table. We are going to drag in a mute button because a 710 doesn't have a button on it, so it would be nice to have a button that we can mute the system with. We're then going to drag in an ANI USB. We don't need a P300 in this instance because the 710 has echo cancellation and DSP on board, so that's all fine. And then the last thing is maybe a speaker as well. And then again, as before, we're just going to hit optimize, same as before, and it's going to do the routing for us and create this initial general workflow that we will work from. So I'm not going to go into lobes and things at the moment, but this, for argument's sake, is our template, our room complete. So you don't need to save the changes or anything like that. It saves it as you go. So if we were to close out of this, then you'll now see that we have HS2 in here as well, not to be confused with the overpriced railway line in the UK. HS2, if we go in just to prove that it's saved, here we have our settings again. So what we can do with this template, again, same as with HS1, we can create a location from the template. So if we wanted to create a room within the rows that was the same design as this, we can simply create a location, call it floor 10, HS2, and then room 1. And then just tell it that it's in this project and then create. And what Designer will do is it will take us to that project and that location. So if we were connected to the network, we could then go into live mode and we could then do the whole making relationships between physical and virtual devices. But yeah, essentially that is us making that room, and that's that process complete. So if we come out of this back into the project section, if we go into the rows room location, you'll see that we now have a new location from the template that we just made. So yeah, templates are a quick way to create common room types that you can work with, and you can apply to different locations at different projects. It doesn't need to be, they aren't tied to a project per se. So yeah, they can be a useful thing to have in your toolbox when you're using Designer for larger projects. So yeah, as before with all of these sections, if there's any questions, feel free to post them and we will be more than happy to clarify.
Great. So that brings us to the end of our 5 workflows that we're going to look at today. I hope this has all been beneficial for you guys. But you might be asking, how can I learn more? Well, I'll tell you exactly how. You can go to the SAI portal, the Shure Audio Institute portal, and you can click on designer how-to videos. If you just go into that search box in the top corner, you'll be able to find them there. Each region has its local SAI platform. Feel free to reach out to your local Shure rep and they will give you the details. And I believe it's question time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We had a couple of questions come in during the course of the webinar, so thanks for those. I'll read them out to you guys. So, for question 1, does Shure Designer assign the IP addresses to the devices automatically using DHCP? Would I be right to assume that they can be changed manually via the software?
Yeah, you can set the IPs in Designer. Craig?
Yeah, if you can set the IP address, whether it's automatic or manual, in Designer itself for each device. But if your live devices are connected to a network with a DHCP server, then they will get their IP address from that DHCP server. Designer is not a DHCP server. Likewise, if they're on a standalone network, then if there's no server, then they'll simply default to a 169.254 type IP address.
Cool, thanks, Craig. Question 2 of 3 thus far is, do you need to have a wired connection to the network to make use of Designer in a deployment scenario?
Yes, a hardwired connection is required for that.
Cool, that was straightforward. And the last question is, how would you be using Designer as a team of engineers? Would you have perhaps common project folders and files, or how might that best work?
I guess that's an easy way to deal with it. If you have an existing file sharing hierarchy or setup using various third-party file sharing systems, you can do that. Designer is geared up, as we've seen, to be able to do project files and locations, and within Designer you can export and import project files, so they are easily transferable across devices. So if you have an engineering team doing the pre-sales and design, and then a commissioning team, it's easy to share the documentation.
Wonderful, thanks, Craig. We've had one more question just pop in. Is there any way to remotely manage the system via Designer, or how might we best remotely manage a system?
That would not fall into the Designer realm unless you had a laptop or a PC permanently on the network running a TeamViewer client, for instance, but that wouldn't be the most efficient way to manage and monitor a system. That would fall into the realm of our System On asset management software that is a separate entity entirely. But yeah, you can find more about System On our website.
Awesome. Well, that seems to be the end of those questions there. So I think, unless any more pop up in the next couple of seconds, we'll move towards the wrap-up section. So I hope this has all been useful for you guys. Thanks for all your participation and questions. Anytime soon, there should be a link pop up for you guys containing a survey about this webinar, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see some more of in the future. So if you'd be able to fill that in, we would hugely appreciate that. But other than that, I'd like to thank both Chris and Craig for their time today.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
And,
good to see you all.
Yeah, well, virtually at least. See you all soon, in person soon. Thanks so much. Take care.